So behind me is a phrase that we've all probably heard before. Maybe you've heard it from a colleague when you're in discussion, or maybe you've heard it from a customer service worker who doesn't quite understand what you're asking about. A lot of us have probably even said this phrase ourselves. Well, this sentence is also very popular among another group. And if you know the title of my talk, you probably know what group I'm talking about. It's not a group of people, but a group of voice assistants. Now, in spite of these messages that we sometimes get that they don't understand us, we've all been promised something, whether you own a voice assistant or not. We've been promised that language technologies will improve our lives. Language technologies include any technology that takes in written, spoken, or typed language in as an input. So this includes our good old friend Siri, Google Home, Alexa, but also autocorrect, autocomplete, auto-reply. And now we have ChatGPT and Bard. Language technologies, in one form or another, exist all around us. And companies have made this promise time and time again. Autocorrect will help us type more efficiently, maybe save us from a few embarrassing typos. And voice assistants have been found to be very useful for people with certain disabilities. And now, with ChatGPT and Bard, there's no telling what we can do next. We can have them write songs for us, develop recipes. They can even do our homework, which I know some of us are familiar with in the audience. But unfortunately, I cannot endorse this promise. Because as it currently stands, language technologies have a racial bias. The way you experience Siri, Alexa, ChatGPT, what have you, may be very different from the way others in this very room experience the same technologies. 35%. This is the average error rate African Americans experience across 5 of the largest commercial voice assistants. So just think about that for a minute. This means that more than 1/3 of what these users say are rendered completely incomprehensible. And computer scientists are doing some really great work trying to lower this number. They're improving their language models, they're collecting more representative voice data. And while this work is great, it continues to do one thing. It's continuing to center technology in its research. I'm of the opinion that we need more work centering the people who use the technology. I want to make sure we maintain our values and stay human in an increasingly automated world. So who am I? I am Kimi, and I work here at the eHeart Lab at CMU in the field called human-computer interaction. And my group's work really aims to understand and privilege the experiences that marginalized communities have with emerging technologies. We do not center on quick fixes or quick profits, and this allows us to really listen to and celebrate the voices that have historically been left out of the development of technology. So my team had a question. We wanted to know what effect does this racial disparity in voice assistants have on users? So we decided to run an experiment. We gathered 50 Black voice assistant users, 50 white voice assistant users, split those groups in half, such that half of them each experience a high error rate and half of them each experience a low error rate. And then we had them go through some tasks, either on their laptop or their mobile device with a voice assistant. So for example, when they asked the assistant what time it was, those in the high error rate condition got a response that's pretty typical of voice assistants. It would say, "Sorry, I didn't catch that," or "Sorry, I didn't understand. Could you repeat that?" While those in the low error rate condition got a nice, accurate response. After they went through a series of tasks, we took some psychometrics and analyzed that data, and the results were rather shocking. We found that our Black voice assistant users in the high error rate condition, they experienced lowered positive emotions. They had a lower sense of group self-esteem, meaning that their sense of social identity was shaken. They also had an increased sense of self-consciousness, meaning that they felt more aware of their environment and what people might think of them. Now, interestingly, these effects were not found in our white participants, even though our white participants experienced the same exact errors in our experiment. So why is that? If both racial groups had identical objective experiences, why did one group face more negative psychological effects than the other? This finding is actually completely consistent with prior research on racism and racial microaggressions. Identical experiences can impact marginalized communities more negatively because either subconsciously or consciously, it may remind them of negative stereotypes or other negative experiences that they faced in the past. And this can trigger a whole host of cognitive and emotional responses. And importantly, while in our experiment we only focus on these two racial groups, work would show that this phenomenon can really carry over to many other racial groups, ethnic groups, immigrant groups, really any group that has faced this type of systemic discrimination. And what's more, work from clinical psychology shows that these effects, when faced over time, which unfortunately for many people they do, they add up. And this can lead to clinical depression, anxiety. Racial microaggressions can also manifest into physical health symptoms like higher blood pressure, for example. So let's think about this for a moment. If we know that these effects exist, and we know that the initial effects when interacting with a technology also exist, if a person is interacting with their voice assistant pretty regularly, like a lot of people do now, and it consistently misunderstands them, might those negative effects, might that lowering of their positive emotions, the lowering of their self-esteem, might that also add up? Might that also contribute to the same negative health consequences? It's a scary thought. So right now, my team is doing work drawing from clinical psychology to see how we can integrate coping methods and interventions into the user experience. We're also running workshops and focus groups to try to really listen to and understand what these marginalized groups experience, and also to understand what is their ideal language technology. And if you're sitting here in the room and you're thinking, that might be me, people oftentimes misunderstand me, my technology oftentimes misunderstands me, I want you to know one thing. Your language, your accent, your voice, they are not the problem, and they never were. In doing my research, I talked to so many people, and so many of them come to me and they say, my accent's too strong. The language I use, it's not right. The word I say to my voice assistant, I have to use a different one because it doesn't understand that one, even though the thing that they were saying before is a completely legitimate word that's especially valid in their own culture. You are not wrong. And it's the responsibility of the designers and the engineers and the technologists to fix the technology. It is never your responsibility to fix your own language because you are not something to be fixed. And if you're sitting here and you're thinking, well, I'm a designer, I'm an engineer, I'm a technologist, or maybe if you're not, and maybe if you just don't even use a voice assistant, what I want you to take away from today is that your experiences with technology may be drastically different from others. And I know this is a really simple idea that we all probably already know in the back of our heads. But sometimes we forget, and I'm also sure a lot of us don't realize quite the extent to which this is true. And So I want you to, when you're designing your technologies, to really think about how you can empathize with users. How can you become a better listener? And I'm going to clear up another misconception here. I don't want you to go out and try to build a technology for diverse users. I want you to think of ways where you might be able to build these technologies with these diverse users. Give them some power, or better yet, put the power in their hands. Give them the tools to make these technologies themselves. Maybe their problems don't even need an app to be solved with. Maybe there's something else. Maybe there's a low-tech solution. But you won't know unless you listen. And also, let's think about when we're interacting with people on a day-to-day basis, how can we be more empathetic? How can we be more understanding? How can we be better listeners? Because ultimately, misunderstandings, whether they occur between people or technology, they may not just be annoyances, but they may add up to some real, legitimate harm. And these harms are not just limited to voice assistants. This type of discrimination that I've identified can be found in many different technologies. Have you ever been texting your friend and you notice that autocorrect changes their name to something that's just completely different? Or if you've played around with ChatGPT, have you noticed something about the tone and the language it consistently uses? Or what might happen if ChatGPT or Bard starts to take in language as an input? What if you're now allowed to talk to it and it might give you a response then? What kind of harms might arise there? So I want everyone to reflect on whether the costs of these technologies really outweigh the benefits. And the answer to this reflection will vary from person to person. So let's not blame ourselves. Let's own and embrace our unique identities. Let's be more empathetic. Let's be better listeners. And let's continue to reflect. Thank you.